This is Steffen Schmidt for InsiderIowa.com. Last time we got together, so to speak, there was trouble in the Middle East, and I wanted to give you an update. This week that trouble is spreading even farther, and if you've been watching the news, you of course know that it's all shifted away from Egypt, where things are sort of quiet for a while at least, and now it is blowing up in Libya. And what we're seeing in Libya is, of course, a dictator who is much more ruthless than the dictator of Egypt and Tunisia. Muammar Gaddafi has always been a very odd person, very strange behavior, and unpredictable. And this week, that turned into him turning against his people. So when they rose up, as you probably know, he commanded his military to basically use their Air Force and their assault helicopters to mow down Libyans who were protesting against him. And one of the things that I wrote about in the piece in InsiderIowa.com on this whole crisis is that it really poses a couple of interesting questions for us, and one of them is whether this is just a temporary situation and nothing much will come from all of this, and at some point somebody else will become the dictator of Egypt and of Libya, and it'll go back to more or less what it's been. The second question is whether this will unravel and produce civil wars, and whether in those civil wars extremist Muslim groups will take control, and whether there's a possibility that these countries that have been basically in uprisings, including Morocco and several other countries, Jordan and so on, are going to become Islamic states, and there will be a lot of presence by Al-Qaeda and other groups like that. The third question is whether the United States and the Europeans will have influence in those countries once the revolutions are over. And the fourth question is what all of this will do to oil prices in the world, and whether that will create a worldwide recession. So as we watch all of these things happening, what we're trying to figure out is where each of these revolutions is going to end up. And I'm guessing that in different countries, different things will happen. That in Egypt, there's a good chance that it will gradually move towards more democracy. I saw an interesting piece this morning that the political parties in Egypt are actually now getting themselves organized and beginning to prepare for future elections. In a country like Jordan, the king is actually a very intelligent person, and he seems to be making moves this week to try and bring more democracy and a little more economic equality to people in his country. So I'm pretty confident that the king of Jordan can make a transition fairly quickly while remaining king to improve the quality of life for people in his country. Some of the other places we're not so sure what is going to happen there, and certainly the most difficult one is Gaddafi in Libya. There is another question, which is whether the Western powers, the US and the Europeans and maybe the United Nations, should actually intervene to stop the civil war, to stop the attacks against civilians. And that's one on which I am divided. My opinion is divided. If we go in there now, even if it is to help stop the slaughter, then people may turn against us. They're very paranoid about colonialism because they have been colonies, and I'm afraid that even if the intentions are good, they're going to think that we're in there to try and put somebody in power who is friendly to the U.S. So I heard from a Libyan earlier today who said to me, no, the West should not intervene, and even if a lot of Libyans have to sacrifice their lives for their freedom, in the end they will be happier because they did it themselves, and they won't have the paranoia about Western powers being involved there. So I'm kind of leaning in that direction. In the long run, I think what has happened, and the reason why we're seeing all of this happening now, is technology. Frankly, the internet, cell phones, text messaging, Facebook, and Twitter are incredibly powerful tools. And the fact that so many people in these countries have their phones, many of them have still cameras or video cameras in those phones, means that the information monopoly, which somebody like President Gaddafi once had, has been undermined by technology, and he can no longer really get away with censorship and keeping everybody in the dark. And he also can't stop people from organizing because they don't have to meet face to face, and they don't have to get together in some dark apartment to plan demonstrations. They can all do it virtually now, and they can have what we call in the information technology field flash mobs, which is that you can say to thousands of people, let's all meet at the central square at 11 o'clock tonight. And literally, by spreading the word with these technologies, including especially Twitter, you can have tens of thousands of people show up there. And that undermines the ability of dictators to manage the scene on the ground. And I think that's had a profound effect. I think the second reason why we're seeing all this happening now as opposed to a few years ago is that the same technologies have shown people in those countries how people are living in other parts of the world. They log in, they have their Facebook account, they can go to YouTube, and they know that people have more freedom, are living in better standard of living conditions in many countries in the world, and therefore they have what I call this revolution of rising expectations. Their expectations of how their lives should be have been increased because they know, by virtue of the fact that they're connected, how people in other countries live. And the rising expectations have not been matched with a rising reality of greater prosperity and greater freedom of communication and so on. And that produced a tremendous demonstration effect, which I think was unleashed as soon as a match was lighted over all the flammable situation that existed. So I'm calling all of these revolutions essentially the IT revolutions in North Africa, because information technology and the networked world I think is probably one of the greatest contributors to this particular phenomenon. We'll keep track of it for you. This is Steffen Schmidt for InsiderIowa.com in front of what I call the Middle Eastern exhibit here at the Iowa State University bookstore. Thanks.